Hello and welcome. My name is Raj Bastood and I'm a consultant psychiatrist based in London. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Margaret, who is a young lady in her 30s, who around 6 to 7 years ago had a series of quite strange experiences that led her to be committed involuntarily to a psychiatric institution under the Mental Health Act. So, Margaret, this incident where things began to go a bit strange for you seemed to come kind of out of the blue. You hadn't really experienced any stressful life event just before, is that right?
That's correct. I had had some changes to my life before, but nothing that I would say was particularly stressful or nothing, and also nothing negative. The changes were positive changes.
Okay. So, but then one weekend, and in particular a Sunday afternoon, something began to change for you. Can you tell us how it all began or what happened?
Well, my recollection is that my thoughts seemed to be coming very quickly to me, and I seemed to be full of very exciting ideas, and I was seeing signs everywhere that seemed to be very meaningful, and I was very, very excited. As this was happening to me, I wasn't aware that I was behaving differently from normal in any way. It all seemed very normal to me at the time, but certainly looking back, that wasn't the case.
And in what way were you behaving differently from normal?
I was with my father at the time, and he said to me that my speech was very disjointed, so I would be talking about one thing 1 second and then on a completely different subject the next, and not really making any sense because I was swaying from one thing to another with no kind of connection between what I was talking about.
And how did he find this? Was this very disturbing to him? Was this a very radical change in you?
Yes, he was very, very concerned, and thought that I was behaving very, very strangely. And after a few hours of me behaving in that way, he actually telephoned one of my friends, and sort of put her on the phone to me, and she agreed that I was very, very strange, and actually came over to be with me as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now you have described this experience as like feeling utter euphoria and magical feelings, like you'd found the key to eternal life, but then combined shortly afterwards with like total despair and extreme fear that your father was about to die.
Yeah, I remember feeling really abject terror of different things, of being worried that something terrible was going to happen to him, of being frightened that something was going to happen to me, being concerned that the world was going to end. And really, there was no sort of basis for any of these fears at all, but they all seemed very real and concerning at the time.
So you really felt the whole world was about to end? Because that must have been a very frightening feeling.
I did feel like that, but at the same time, I it's really, really difficult to explain. So although one moment I was feeling very afraid, I was also feeling euphoric as well, and excited, and I guess you would say manic as well. And I was quite convinced that if we did certain things, then we would be able to make a difference.
So then eventually your father called a doctor out, and the doctor came, but it wasn't exactly a particularly helpful consultation. Tell us what happened.
I do not particularly remember this episode, but what I am told was that he came and kind of examined me and then disappeared very shortly afterwards. And my father said that he just didn't seem to know what to do and didn't seem to want to be involved. Whether that's a fair representation of what happened, I do not know, because obviously the whole thing was a very negative experience for my father as well. But I don't actually remember being examined by that doctor, so I can't really comment on that.
Okay, but then you got worse, and it seems like your father was left with no alternative but to call the police. And this is a recurring theme in these interviews that clinical services get involved, but don't seem particularly helpful first off, and the police have to get called.
I think what happened was that my father and my friend had contacted NHS 24, NHS Direct, whatever they're called, and they had advised that they then contacted the police, who would be able to take me to a place of safety. Now, my dad didn't know what that meant. He had never heard the expression of them being sectioned before, and he thought that was the best thing to do because he thought I was going to be safe and be looked after there. But he has said to me that in retrospect, knowing what was actually going to happen, that may not have been his next move.
So what then did happen? The police arrived, and it sounds like things really kicked off.
The police arrived, and what I don't remember them arriving, but what I do remember very, very vividly is being literally dragged, kicking and screaming from my flat down 2 flights of stairs and put into police van or police car. And I was struggling every step of the way because I was absolutely terrified. I was literally having to be dragged by 2 officers out of my flat, and I was very, very frightened.
You were put in handcuffs?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
So the next thing happens is that you arrived at some kind of secure hospital? That's the way it's been described?
Yeah, that's certainly what happened next. Again, I don't remember arriving there, but I do remember being there, and I remember being in a room, but it was sort of open plan room, so I could kind of walk around the room and also walk out the door of the room. And there was somebody there with me, and my father and my friend and her boyfriend were there with me as well. But then they left after that, and then I was just there on my own.
And that was a very frightening experience.
That was very frightening because I didn't understand where I was, and I actually thought that I was in some sort of prison. And I didn't understand why I was there because, as far as I was concerned, I hadn't done anything wrong. I was very, very confused and concerned by this time, and didn't, as I say, didn't know why I was there, and didn't know how I was going to get out.
And then you tried to escape?
Apparently so, yes. Again, I don't actually recall this, but apparently what I did was in the room that I was in, you could just walk out of the door and into the corridor, and I was kind of doing that and sort of going back and forth, which I do remember. And then one of the times when I did that, apparently, and I say apparently because, as I say, I don't remember this, apparently I smashed the glass on the fire escape, which opens the secure doors, and I ran out into the grounds of the hospital, but was quickly tackled to the ground by members of staff and brought back in, and then I was placed in basically a locked room where I couldn't go back and forward out of the door, and I was there in complete isolation. And
I think you were given some medication at this point. I think you were given some medication at this point.
When I was in that isolated room, a member of staff attempted to give me some medication, and I do remember this quite clearly because the first thing that I asked at that point was, well, what is this that you're trying to give me? And she answered, and I presume it was some sort of antipsychotic, but I had never heard of the type of medication, and I literally threw it back in her face and said, no, I'm not taking that, I don't know what it is. and that was that. Nobody tried to force me to take anything.
It then sounds as though you had a very disturbed night.
Yeah, I was there for several hours. I was completely terrified. I was shouting and screaming. I was throwing myself against the door, trying to open it, trying to get out. I could see members of staff in the corridor, and I was shouting to them, please, somebody talk to me, somebody tell me what's going on. And everybody just completely ignored me. I don't know whether the room was soundproofed and they couldn't hear me, but I was just completely ignored. And I was hurting myself quite badly by trying to get out because I was so desperately throwing myself against the door to try to release myself. Obviously that didn't help, and I couldn't get out.
And you were given food, but it was placed on the floor, a bit like a dog, apparently you described it as.
That's right, yes. At one point somebody brought some food in for me and just left it on the ground. There was no table or anything like that in the room. Something that was quite strange about the food was that they said it was vegetarian because they knew that I was vegetarian, which I'm not. So I remember thinking that was very odd at the time, but I just went along with it because I was so frightened and didn't understand what was going on.
There was also a toilet in the room, but no door to give you any privacy.
That's right, yeah. So the toilet was just a WC, but no door there. So when I had to use the loo, everybody could see what I was doing, which was pretty horrible and very humiliating. Certainly not used to having to go to the loo with people watching.
So then several days go by with you missing meals because you sleep and you're not sure when the meals are, but you're not given any food if you miss a meal. And then eventually you meet a psychiatrist for the first time, and it is several days from the time you were admitted. So tell us a bit about that experience of the psychiatrist.
Yeah, as I recall, it was the Tuesday that I met up with him. He was very nice and friendly. By this time, obviously, I did understand where I was. It had been explained to me that I had been sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I knew which building I was in. By this time, my father and my friend had been to visit me. So I was feeling a lot happier because at least I knew what was going on. The psychiatrist that I saw was very friendly and very pleasant to me. The main thing that I remember speaking to him about on the occasions that I saw him was asking him why this had happened to me in the first place, and the main answer that I got was that he didn't know, and that it just sometimes happens, and that it was something that they didn't really understand very much about. And one of the things he said was that I would probably never know why it had happened to me, and what my main concern was.
That doesn't sound like a very helpful answer.
Well,
that doesn't sound like a very helpful answer.
My main concern was that if nobody knew why it had happened in the first place, then how could I prevent it from happening again? And my main concern was that it might be something that would happen again to me. But what he said was that the longer that I went without it ever happening again, then the less likely it would be that it would never happen again.
Okay, so how did you eventually get out of this hospital?
I was moved from one secure unit to what was a slightly less secure unit within a couple of days, and then on I believe it would have been the Thursday, then I was allowed to have to be released for the weekend, but on the condition that I then met up with the psychiatrist on Monday to see if I could be formally just discharged. So I was sort of placed on day release or weekend release, and saw him again on the Monday, and he said, "Yeah, I still seemed fine, so I didn't need to go back."
From the time you were admitted to the time you got out, then, was it, roughly speaking, how long?
I was admitted on the on the Sunday, or well, I suppose it would have technically been the early hours of the Monday morning, and then I got out on the Thursday late afternoon. So it was a few days.
Okay, okay. And what's happened since then? Have you been back in a hospital or had outpatient follow-up, or what's happened?
I had to see the psychiatrist on a few occasions just for follow-up appointments. After a few sessions, he didn't feel that there was any point in continuing the sessions, and I was happy not to continue the sessions either. And since then, I think it was I can't remember which month of the year in 2009 it was, but it was maybe sort of May or June or something like that I was discharged from his care. And since then, I haven't consulted anybody about my mental health. Haven't had any issues with my mental health at all since then. So so far, it seems to have been a one-off experience, which I hope it will stay that way.
So you didn't have any ongoing treatment really since then? Treatment has stopped. You're not seeing anyone. You're not taking any medication.
No, I never ever took any medication. After I was discharged from the hospital, I was prescribed diazepam by the psychiatrist, which was supposed to be in case I experienced the feeling of my thoughts coming too fast again, or anything stressful, I suppose. But I didn't ever feel the need to take any of that. I think I was only prescribed like 4 or 5 or something, but I never took any of it. I didn't ever feel the need to.
Has anyone ever explained what happened then? Because you seem to have had a one-off acute episode of what sounds a bit like a psychotic experience for no apparent reason, and it hasn't come back.
No, it was diagnosed as being an acute psychotic episode, but there was no explanation that I was given as to why it happened. I've tried to do my own reading and research to try and find out why it might have happened, and the only sort of deduction that I made is that it was due to quite a dramatic life change, because I had moved for the first time 400 miles away from friends and family a couple of months before it happened, which was obviously a major change, and that's the only kind of thing that kind of would back up the reading research that I've done that would tie in with why it happened. But certainly at the time I was really enjoying having moved away and enjoying my new job and new life, so it hadn't felt as if it was an extremely stressful or unpleasant experience in any way. So I don't know for sure, but certainly from my reading, that could be the reason, just because it was such a major change that perhaps my body was taking a while to get used to.
But as a result of being sectioned under the Mental Health Act, there seem to have been some implications, despite the fact you didn't have any recurrence of the symptoms. There seems to have been some implications in terms of your driving license and also life insurance. Could you explain that?
Yes, of course. The psychiatrist advised me after this happened that I would need to contact DVLA to let them know about the episode, and he did warn me that maybe that I wouldn't be able to drive for some time, because that was normal after an episode like that. Because he felt that I was absolutely fine, he actually wrote to DVLA on my behalf to say that he felt there was absolutely no reason why I should not be able to drive. But unfortunately, they made the decision to remove my license for a period of 6 months. And following that, when I was able to renew the license again, I could only renew it on a temporary basis, and it was only last year that I was finally able to get a permanent driving license again. I was having to reapply for my license on a regular basis and answer questions about my health that were completely irrelevant, because it was asking questions like, what medication are you on, which was obviously, it was never any medication, so the questions weren't particularly relevant for my circumstance. With regards to the life assurance, I have a mortgage, so I had life assurance and critical illness cover in place, and when I contacted them, because I knew I was supposed to contact them if there was any change to my health and my circumstances. They said, oh, that's fine, we can still cover you, but your premium will go up from £36 a month to £400 a month, which unfortunately I couldn't afford to pay, so I had to cancel my life assurance, which was a major worry when obviously you have a mortgage and you want something to be in place if anything happens to you.
Yeah. So these two things seem very unfair consequences of what happened to you.
I did feel that it was quite unfair because within just over a week of the episode happening, I was actually back at work full time and functioning completely normally in my life and doing everything that I would usually do. So I didn't really feel it was particularly deserved. There was no ongoing treatment. After I was signed off from the psychiatrist, there wasn't any monitoring whatsoever. So it seemed a bit over the top, shall we say.
Yeah. Let's go back right to the beginning. If the first doctor who turned up, and I know that you don't really want to comment on the way that doctor handled it, but let's just imagine that the doctor who had turned up had handled it differently and had offered you some medication and had persuaded you to take it, and that had calmed you down, and you had a follow-up appointment, let's say a few days later, with your GP, and so on and so forth. Do you think it's possible this could have been handled in a way which would have meant that you didn't have to be placed under a section of the Mental Health Act?
It's very hard for me to say. I do wonder whether if I had been prescribed something like diazepam that would have helped me to relax or maybe even helped me to sleep, whether perhaps the episode wouldn't have gone as far as it did. Obviously that would have been much better if I hadn't had to go into hospital. It wouldn't have had the impact on driving, on the life assurance. But whether I was too far gone for that to be an option, I don't know. It is very hard to say. You asked me something else there, which I don't think I've answered. Just remind me what you asked me there.
We're just wondering if you thought it could have been handled without the necessity of placing you under a section of the Mental Health Act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I like to think that it could have. I like to think that it could have, but obviously I don't know for sure, and it may be that I was beyond help by the time that doctor even saw me. But it would certainly have been nice if I hadn't been dragged kicking and screaming from my flat, because that was a very, very unpleasant experience.
Yeah, so I know this is very difficult to disentangle, but if we could put aside the fact that I think the police arriving and the way where it was handled at that point was not good, and also several aspects of the admission were not good in terms of the way you were looked after. I know those things are difficult to put to one side for a second, but what do you think about the principle that there should be a thing called the Mental Health Act, and that sometimes when people are very unwell and they lose insight and they are maybe a danger to themselves or other people, that there should be a thing called the Mental Health Act on the statute books, and people it is possible legally to commit them to hospital against their will temporarily? What do you think about that idea?
Wow, that's a very good question. Certainly, I think it is a good thing that a person can be taken to a place of safety where they will not be a danger to themselves or to other people. I don't know whether I would have become a danger to myself or to others later that evening, perhaps the next day. And if the fact that I was sectioned prevented that from happening, then yes, that is a positive thing. And that would be a positive thing for anybody who may be a danger to themselves or to other people.
So, again, I may be pressing the point here and maybe overstating it, but if there was a vote tomorrow where you got a chance to vote on whether there should be a thing called a Mental Health Act which deprived people of their liberty under certain circumstances, you would vote for it?
It would really depend on the circumstances. If it was to prevent somebody from doing harm to themselves or to other people, then yes.
Okay, but let's put the harm thing to one side. Some people might say that you were a bit out of control, even if you were not a danger to yourself or other people. And being out of control could have had pretty negative consequences for you. You could have done something that might have been harmful to yourself inadvertently, or if you turned up at work in a very out of control state, then you might have lost your job or damaged yourself reputationally pretty irretrievably. So there's a sense in which the Mental Health Act is also there to protect people from themselves, even if they aren't an immediate danger to themselves or other people, but their unpredictability could have very, very difficult as well.
Well, my reputation at work was damaged anyway because they were told about what had happened to me, and I had to go back to work and face people with them having that knowledge. So it's not as if the sectioning helped avoid that reputational damage in any way.
Yeah.
What my sort of main objection to the sectioning was the fact that I was separated from family and friends, and nobody explained why that had to happen, and that was the most disconcerting thing to me. And my main memory of being there and being so frightened was asking, where's my father? Why have I been taken away from my father? And the answer that I got every time was, we don't know where your father is. And that was very, very, very worrying, and I don't understand why anybody would ever think that it would be helpful to be separated from a family member when you're obviously in an extreme state of distress.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you completely. I also think that your situation was handled really badly, and I think unfortunately it often is handled badly, which is it's very useful that you are speaking out about your experience, because the problem is that the wider public doesn't get to hear about these experiences. The way I would characterize it is that you had an emergency, a bit like there's a cardiac emergency, and there are like emergency services that respond in an acute crisis to help people with a cardiac emergency. You had a kind of mental health emergency, but just as you need efficient and effective services to handle a cardiac emergency and to know what they're doing, you need similar services to handle a mental health emergency. Just the services don't seem very good often when it comes to handling a mental health emergency. I wondered what your opinion was on that.
Well, I have two opinions on that, because on the one hand, I got better very, very, very quickly after I was sectioned, and that was a very positive thing. And the psychiatrist actually said to me that he had never seen somebody recover so quickly from an episode like that. And perhaps it was being completely removed from everything that helped me become well so quickly. I don't know. The negative aspect was certainly some of the way that I was treated, and the separation from family and friends, and the fact that it wasn't explained to me what was actually happening or where I was until I had been there for many hours. So there are sort of two different points. There are sort of good points from it and bad points from it as well, and it's almost impossible to separate those two.
If there's anyone listening to this who has been through anything similar or is worried about going through anything similar, do you have anything to say to them about in relation to your own experience? I mean, you seem to have come out of it, and you're very well, and it sounds like you're very optimistic about the future.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that if something like this was ever to happen to me again, I hope that I would recognise the feelings that I experienced and be able to do something to help myself relax before it got to that crisis stage. whether that would be sort of just taking some time to sit and relax, whether it would mean going to see the doctor and asking for some sort of medication to help me relax. I don't know, but I think just recognising those, now that I can look back on it, recognising those sort of manic thoughts and feelings that I was having as being out of the ordinary, whereas at the time it all seems to be quite normal. But I think if it was ever to happen again, I think I would recognise that no, those feelings weren't normal, and actually it's very important to stop and slow down and make sure you relax before things become any worse.
Would you accept that those signs or symptoms could be labelled as symptoms of a transient but real mental illness or mental health problem?
Oh, definitely. There isn't any other explanation that I'm aware of for what happens to me other than a severe mental illness.
If one final question. Sorry, did you say that again?
Even though that it was very brief, it was just the last thing that I said. Sorry, you said you had one final question.
Yes. If there's anyone listening to this who is a psychiatrist or a clinician or a therapist or a doctor or a nurse or anyone who works in mental health services and deals with people who've been placed under sections of the Mental Health Act, or indeed is involved in the sectioning process, do you have a message for them that arises out of your experience?
And the main thing that I would say is that it should be explained to patients why they're there, which wasn't explained to me until I had been there for several hours and until I had actually started to calm down of my own accord. And I also feel that separating me from the people that I was familiar with and the people that I knew also had a negative impact. So perhaps if somebody was going to be placed under a section, friends and family, even if they can't be with them, if they could at least be on hand so that they're not too far away, and so that if somebody's saying that they want to see family or friends, they're not being told, well, you can't because we don't know where they are.
Yes, I agree. I think that's an extremely important point. I have never understood why the family or friends are not more part of the process, because it would be very reassuring to have a familiar face around.
Yeah.
Well, Margaret, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome. Thank you.